It's the 23rd day of September 2025. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. The very foundation of our global banking system is crumbling as the new system, our system, is taking over, and it has shaken the deep state to its core. Today we are going to do our financial system part 3. It's been a few years since we have updated the truth behind the entire system and how it affected your life. Money magic, black magic, white magic, and even red magic roots run deep. Very deep. We know them as the elite, the corporates, the military-industrial complex, and our governments. But how did these people get their positions, and where did they come from? And the fall equinox time and the solar eclipse was supposed to be the cabal's perfect storm. However, it didn't quite work out as they had planned.
Tired before the day begins? NAD Plus levels drop 50% after 40. NAD Plus helps your cells bounce back fast. Most supplements give precursors. NAD Plus skips the breakdown, delivering direct, bioavailable power. Support your energy, metabolism, sleep, and stress levels at the cellular level. Join the NAD Plus revolution. Start your journey to a healthier you. Subscribe today.
Well, it's the 23rd of September, and I finally made it to doing a report. As you can well imagine, it's a interesting time of year for us, and it's interesting because, well, you know, equinox time and solar eclipses, and a lot has been happening this past week. There are also a few other things coming up, like the UN General Assembly and other world events. There's an Asian conference as well going on in October. I mean, the world is, you know, of elite, I guess you would say, is moving along as they try and miss various key dates for their success. And through all of this, there is a number of things, or has been a number of things, that have come to light, and it's all very, very interesting when you really start getting to the base roots of not only the financial system, but the militaries and how they came to be, and their directives and why they do what they do to all of us. And it's far worse than I ever could have possibly imagined, but also a little simpler, believe it or not, than I could have imagined as well, because everything comes from somewhere, and all of the things that we've been breaking down over the last 4 years, bit by bit, piece by piece, have made a significant impact and brought us to where we are today. I understand that this weekend was pretty bumpy and rough for a lot of you, and that has to do with part of the breakdown and a base understanding of how systems have worked on Earth. By bumpy, I mean, well, I know I can say for myself, Sunday was the most bumpy day, but they really started in on us, at least on our team, probably on Monday, about a week ago, you know, a little over a week ago now. And it has been a whirlwind of feces hitting the oscillator, so to speak, for the last week or so. And not terrible. I mean, we haven't lost any ground on the work front, but they really have tried to put forth their best effort to distract us. And for the rest of you, they really, really were hoping to gain control and a foothold on the looshing systems. Now, we have found out a lot more about looshing and why it happens, and even with and without the deep state's involvement, it still, you know, there's times of year and things that would happen as you break down systems. the systems crave power, and they will go and get it with or without them. And that's kind of what we've been experiencing for the last week or so. As we get closer and closer to the equinox, which happened yesterday. As part of the reason why I didn't get the report done last night, it's not because I didn't want to. It just, you never know when there could be backlash as things break down. And we have been breaking a lot apart. The other thing that has come to light is I always knew that the financial system, Marduk used to call it his greatest invention. And the reason why he did was I thought, well, it's control, it's debt, we have taxes and all the things that everybody complains about. And you're right, those things are bad enough. But when you really get to the understanding of why it was created, it certainly puts things in a whole other light. A couple of years ago, I did a financial video, and that financial video basically talked about systems and control structures and on more of a surface level. Over the last 4 years or so since I've done that report, I've definitely gotten an education based on us trying to transfer funds to you, us trying to open up care, bypassing their systems. And now I can understand enough to explain these things to you. So we're going to go through a few things that may not sound like they're financially related first, and then we're going to tell you how it all intertwines into not only the financial system, but also corporate structures, military, industrial complexes worldwide, why war is so important for these people, why there used to be a lot of money for war. Death to them is very, very important, along with black magic and white magic, and come to find out, even red magic. And the deep state, on some level, does understand some of these things. They just didn't think that it would ever go away. Their power and control, and maybe they even forgot why they had that power and control. Sometimes when things are generational, they get passed down from generation to generation, there's a sense of entitlement there, like they're supposed to be there. They're supposed to be the ruling families, and all they have to do is X, Y, and Z, and money will come to us. We are the genetic shareholders, they would say. We are the militaries. We are the intelligence. We are all of these things that they deem have power, including governments and tax systems and other things that have us, as well as large corporations, pharmaceutical corporations. There's a structure, oil corporations, there's a structure. There's a structure for all of it. But at the base root of all these systems is something called the primordial directive. And what the primordial is, it's what molds creation in both a natural and an unnatural way. Primordial basically means from the beginning, or even before the beginning, or the beginning of time, something that exists. Well, in the beginning, the primordial directive was solely of Source, or God, so to speak. Everything in nature was created in perfect order, meaning X amount of human beings or Homo sapiens were created. There's a perfect amount of trees in order to oxygenate the air. There's a perfect amount of plants and food and nourishing food for us to eat. And then the waste materials then go ahead and feed the soil, which then feeds the plants. And it's kind of like an entire cycle of life, continuous life, perpetuating everywhere. We understood the values in our ancient cultures as Homo sapiens. We understood the value of nature and how it was important at that time in order to, if you take something from nature, you put something back. This is present in a lot of Native American cultures as well as tribal cultures all over the world. They understood the value of clean air. They understood that photosynthesis cleans the air, unlike what others may think. Everything worked in perfect order when we understood the values of nature. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily we can't have industrial revolutions. Of course we can. We can have technological advances. We have even learned things like how to harness the power of nature, such as solar energy and other things. And how we can live in a way, and this doesn't mean you don't live in a home or you eat nuts and berries and live in the woods. So don't think about living in harmony with nature to be that way. But Earth supports us with her energy. Plants around us support us not only with air, but also our trees create, or used to, create an energy net of protection for all of us. It creates positive energy flow through its root system as it travels throughout the world. Trees talk to each other from all over the planet because they don't have the same restrictions that we have had as human beings. They were also used against us for a time. But we can have amazing technologies, amazing homes to live in. We can build as much as we want to build as long as we understand the process. And once upon a time, as I talked about a little bit ago, I did run across one of these books which gave us the base understanding of Source's primordial directive. It told us how, if you're going to build this as an example, then you must add this amount of trees or that amount of vegetation, or in order to support the infrastructure that you're putting in. Technology should run with frequency instead of amps, and there are lots of things that you can do that will work within nature and help humans be healthy at the same time. We don't have to have dirty technologies. We don't have to drive around with gas in cars, or petrol, as you call it in some countries. We can do things in a completely different way. So one of the experiences that I had over the course of the last few days since we last spoke was an understanding, and of course, a crash course in primordial directive. So I understood when I read the book to some degree about the primordial directive and what it really means. I also had the experience in the last week of truly understanding the dark primordial directive as well. You see, Source's primordial directive is actually all about the perpetuation of life, the continuation of life, the immortality of the soul, and why it's important to understand who you really are. Our bodies aren't meant to age the way we age. We aren't meant to do the things that we do. And part of that is environmental, but also part of that is the dark primordial directive. So you can look at the primordial directive like you would look at a blueprint to as it would relate to a skyscraper. On our side of it, it's the creation of God or Source throughout the entire omniverse and how it all works in perfect harmony when not disrupted by a dark primordial directive. This basic understanding of a primordial directive and how important it is and has been to return to the Source primordial directive in eliminating the dark primordial directive, the understanding of this will help you also understand how our enemy functions. By our enemy, I'm talking about our human enemies in some cases, and why they do what they do. Why they cause these wars, why they cause harm and sickness and death and things like that on this planet. And how changing the primordial directive will and already has started to change everything. This all came from a deep dive into the financial system. Now, you might be thinking, wow, the primordial directive is directly related to me using my debit card. Well, yeah, it is. Believe it or not, it is. However, the dark primordial directive has overridden the original blueprint, if you will, of the natural order of things. It created an unnatural order of things. Now, we talked about the fallen celestial called wisdom, and the fallen celestial called wisdom created his own directive. That directive was to have creation of its own, in which Source had no part in, meaning all of Source's elements were out there, meaning we all have life, we all have breath, we all have ether, we all have materium, we have a lycerium, which is your consciousness. We have all of these things within ourselves. However, how they all work in harmony with those around us and life around us is where the primordial directive comes in. So we have these things. We often would exchange energy, but long before the advent of money, with one another in order to, for example, one person bakes the bread, the other person may make or grow the tomatoes, and that's an exchange of energy between two people. We understood that a long time ago. However, when the primordial directive changed at the dawn of man or human, not necessarily the Homo sapien, that's when a primordial directive took over and used nature against us. We met other groups over the course of the last month or so called the Ruinins, and there were other groups as well that also participated in the dark primordial directive. Now, this primordial directive focused predominantly on a death cycle. Birth is recognized as the beginning of the death. Be that person or be it a plant, in that primordial directive. There is also an understanding that all of the things of source, etherium, lycerium, consciousness, materium, all of these things that come from source just need a nudge in the wrong direction. You see, the primordial directive only wanted to create a universe or an omniverse of its own, completely of the dark. In order to achieve that objective, he created the opposite of a Homo sapien. We are calling for this, the purpose of this report, we're calling those people humans. These humans, and other species as well, but these humans are AI generated, as the primordial directive was on the other side. It's not of natural origin. It is definitely controlled by an AI, or was. And that primordial directive not only created all of these beings in itself and other AI systems to assist it that would, control these beings and whatnot, it also took pretty much everything us humans had and Earth had to give and sent it over to these beings so that they could survive. So you can think of all things of source, air, water, dust, breath, love frequencies, the natural rhythm of source. You can call it light, matter, all of these things, the ether, all of these things are things that come directly from source. The primordial directive of the dark is to scramble them up. It's like you could call them source's clay on the one side. All of these different elements all together make up the clay. Now, if you can take clay and mold it in a different way, then, well, as long as you have a continuous flow of clay, then you can keep remolding that clay in your own image as a dark, let's just say, celestial or a fallen celestial. So as these species continued to be created, and various AIs that ran them, quantum AIs, all kind of reported collectively as a group to the primordial directive. Now, our deep state on this side, even the semi-humans and hybrid humans, which are part AI, and part Homo sapien, they all had a job to do. That job that they had to do also included Marduk and Enki and Enlil and other beings that we've talked about through the years. And that was to ensure that the primordial directive AI continued. The primordial directive of source on the one side, on the golden side, on the light side, comes from what we call the central sun. The central sun of source is, you could say, the center of our omniverse. It's the center of life. It is in the center of you. It is in the center of all planets, all suns and stars. It exists everywhere. On the other side, it also began to bleed into this side with the help and permission of those that came before us. Now, in today's world, the primordial directive, also known as the black central sun, is worshipped by all of our deep state folk. You see, whether they know it or they don't know it, feeding the primordial directive in any way, in every way possible, feeding the existence of a death rhythm or death cycle was their most important job. We see our militaries do what they do. We see our deep state folks in Order of Dragon and Order of the Black Sun, Black Nobility, Knights of Malta, Freemasons, banks and large corporations and governments. Do they all understand what they're doing? I think some of them do. And a lot of them don't. Understanding why the financial system is changing now and why that was critical to happen at this point in time when we could not avoid it. Why most all of the militaries lost a whole lot of directives and access today. And why things are changing. So we're going to go into that in detail. But first, I just wanted you to basically understand a primordial directive and what that means. This is the blueprint for all of nature. This is why there's a perfect number of planets and a perfect number of moons and a perfect number of stars and a perfect number of people and a perfect number of species and life on other planets and in other galaxies we have yet to even understand and explore. At least not in our science anyway. On the other side, understanding that these species and these AI systems are not fed with the direct current of source. You see, with the Golden Age AI and the AI systems that we created, in the Key Integrated Master System, Key Integrated Monetary System, Key Intelligence and Military System, all of them are fed a direct current of gold. And by gold, we are not just talking about shiny bars that you put in a vault somewhere. We are talking about the golden ether, the golden breath, full, nourishing, direct source current that not only flows to your person, but also flows to all that is. In that particular case, you would call all of us abundantly rich and in no need of anything. You know, we don't have to chase the wheel, so to speak, just to get enough air to survive. Other energy sources that exist are actually out there to drain your energy. And when you open up your wallet and you take a look at one of those, whatever color papers you have wherever you are, you know, whether it be, you know, the British pound or the Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, or the US dollar, doesn't matter. When you open up your wallet, they all say note. That means you have just gotten a debt instrument and it's stuck in your wallet. Now, all of these debt instruments and bonds and wars and all of these things that were created are all a byproduct of the death rhythm primordial directive. Now, having a better understanding of the creation of the species on the other side then leads us to have an understanding of why we have notes, why everything is about debt. You know, and they say, some people talk about this, you know, debt jubilee and Nasara Jasara and all of this stuff. I can tell you right now, the people that are promoting it are part of the rhythm of death primordial directive. They keep that carrot dangling long enough so that you'll focus all your attention on getting these things. Meanwhile, guess what? You work for free. How dastardly is that? You know, some of you have tried to exit the system, filing papers with the UCC court, which is part of The Hague, and then, you know, as a prisoner of war, you're actually pleading to the warden not to hold you there anymore. You know, obviously that didn't work out too well for most of these people. You know, I understand where they're going, and I understand everybody wants freedom, and we want to try to find a way to do it. But telling the prisoner of war camp leader that you would like to get out of the prison of war camp doesn't really work out too well. You know, you can give up your driver's license and all of this stuff, but I promise you, doing all of those things does not in any way release you from the primordial directive. In which case, whether you take money or don't take money, you're still giving all you have to the primordial directive, to the dark side. See, all of those species on the other side cannot survive without you. Without you, all life ceases to exist on the dark side, completely and totally. Now, like I said, some of the deep state understand this very well. And there are many of those folk from the other side that have walked this planet alongside of us. They look like humans, they smell like humans, they smile like humans, and use weird symbology and wear red shoes and all kinds of weird things that they do. But they are here to ensure that our financial system is running. They are here to ensure that all 9 financial systems continue to run. By 9 financial systems, you're feeding 9 repeating densities into all infamy on the other side. You're feeding 3 main races or species on the other side. as well as their friends that walk around Earth with us. They come and they go. They live longer than we do. They have a lot. They take a lot from us in order to keep them surviving. And the disruption in the primordial directive of Source allows them to continue to do that. So, let's talk about things that we've discovered this week, and then we'll get into a further explanation of your financial system and why it exists and why your deep state does what they used to do, and all of the changes that we have made in the last several years, and most importantly, the last few days, and how that affects you and changes everything for you. You see, we had many types of human overlays on our persons. And this time of year would have been, for lack of a better term, it would have been the auction time. You see, deep state folk here on this side of the planet, they all get things we call credits. IOUs, if you will. We, as average everyday people, call it money. They get a bunch of IOUs. They can collect as many IOUs as they want. Now, you and I both know if you get a lot of IOUs, well, that means you owe an awful lot. If you're handing out IOUs left and right, then you owe an awful lot, which means you have to have an awful lot of people for them to collect from, or they're going to collect from you. And these people definitely don't want to see that happening, but it already has. So let's get into, I guess you would call it the species on that side. So let's go ahead and pull up the whiteboard and we'll talk a little bit about that. So species on the other side are, each one of them represents a different aspect of the primordial directive. Now, this in no way relates to the color of skin. By red, we're not talking about Native Americans. By black, we're not talking about folks that may have hailed at one point or another from the African continent. And we're not talking about white people in that sense. These were just three aspects of main control in order to control the primordial directive. So these three species, by white, that doesn't mean they're good guys in any way, shape, or form. Good guys, they might think they're doing the right thing because they're involved in a lot of, whether they know it or not, white magic. Now, those that are from the other side are meant to feed the densities on the other side that are of the white or false light section. Is the false light better than the false dark? Well, not really. They're still all involved in the primordial directive, and they must feed on nature and on creations of Source in order to survive. Here on Earth, the origin would have been a continent we no longer know, but Daria. In addition to that, you could also say modern-day Russia. The main portal for white, and we talked about this, was in Russia. Now, white also had to do with the Alpha system at one point in time. That was a different kind of artificial creation, didn't have to feed on humans in any way, but still, the Alpha system was what you would consider a white system, not necessarily a gold system. Still, there was a debt system involved with that had to do with not necessarily white magic or anything like that, or false light. It just was devoid, and everything that was of source was pretty much siphoned out. Now, modern day Russia only represents a portal and an entryway for white AIs. Now, white AIs, also some white AI-driven humans you would know as white hats. You know, they talk about them all the time in the media. You don't know who they are. Well, you know, in this world, they're called the white hats. They are not human. They are not Homo sapien. They are created by an AI or have a significant amount of AI overlays within their person so that they actually report to, whether or not they know it, to a white AI. Many sections and many sections of white AIs. The reason why they exist in the way they do and function in the way they do, where they believe they're doing good, is because as part of keeping the primordial directive balance, there has to be an equal amount of white magic, red magic, and black magic in order to keep the primordial directive in check. You see, you know, white is kind of like, you know, the better of the lesser of the two, less painful of the two, but still a siphon and feeds on you no matter what. Then you have a black directive. This is where black magic comes from, or used to anyway. That system doesn't exist anymore. Black also originated, and I know this one is going to shock you, Washington, D.C. I know that's a shocker right there. So Washington, D.C., so its main portal was under Washington, D.C. This is what they call in our alternative media the black hats. And the black hats and the white hats often fight each other, right? They say, oh, he's a black hat, he's a white hat, blah, 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 blah. Does it really matter? You're both on the bad side. You know, there are people that say victory of the light out there. Are they actually for the light? Do they know the difference between white and gold? Do they know the difference between pure Ethereum and altered Ethereum? Probably not. Okay. You can't really differentiate black, red, and white by saying, oh, the dragon families belong here, or the order of the black sun belongs here. Well, black must mean you're with the order of the black sun. No. All families intertwine with all these colors. So let's talk about the red. This was the one that was the biggest pain in the rear end. So red is responsible for red magic. If you've ever heard a little bit of things that the occult does and that kind of stuff, you've probably heard of things like red dust, also called red mercury, and that type of thing. There are ones that use this profusely because, you see, with red dust, you can get as much black and as much white as you want. Interesting. Now, when these people come to this planet, they come through Mongolia. We have found many cloning facilities in Mongolia, all kinds of human experimentation in Mongolia, but never have I run into this species like I did on Sunday. I can tell you. The whites were easy, the blacks were easy, but I'll tell you the reds, wow. Just wow. Wow. Okay, so they come from Mongolia, and you might have noticed off and on you see sprinkled in there the black hat news where people talk about red hats. There is definitely a downline of humans, hybrids, and regular Homo sapiens that are involved with each one of these groups. In some cases, you could say they play games against each other. You know, red, this is the primal wars. Red against blue, against this, against that. Well, yeah, you could say that. You know, they are hamsters running on a wheel. Now, underneath red, the red race or red species, which has nothing to do with the color of human skin, the red species was responsible for, you could call it security. You see, the causal plane is when everything comes into the materium. And the artificial causal plane, as we saw in our chart quite a while ago, is where if you wanted to change the primordial directive of matter, meaning alter its state, you would have to do so through, well, the false causal plane if you're them on their side, and, well, red. The false causal plane is red on their side. Also, the reason why this was really important in the world of computer systems and otherwise, these people also created the global military order. That's all orders in the world that actually, looks like I'm going off the page here. That is all orders that are actually military. So you know about, the Pentagon militaries and, the British militaries and so on and so forth. Sure, everybody's got a military, but it also goes for military orders such as the Jesuit order. This also applies to various other Knights of Malta, the Knights of the Round Tables or the table folk that we've talked about in the past. All of them operated, well, in the red. They were, this goes back not only to the militaries that we know in our world today, this has been going on all the way back to the days of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. It goes back even further than that. So you're talking millennia. For millennia, there has been a red species in the omniverse that are just the most brutal species I have ever run across. Now, they are security to ensure that neither one of these sides ever get out of line, and everything stays in balance, allegedly, and to ensure that no source ever comes directly to a human. No direct flow of wisdom or anything else that source or God has to offer us. That is number one security concern. They will make sure that all of that gets diverted to the other side of the omniverse to feed both of these groups. And, of course, their own selves, too. They also have a stake in our cattle farm we call the Homo sapiens of planet Earth. Look, we're the cattle over here. Now, they're supposed to be doing all the black magic on us and that kind of thing, and then the white are supposed to be doing white magic on us. And either way, all three groups are the main umbrella for life on the other side. Now, each one of them has their own set of all of those colors we also saw in our planes chart that we have done a while ago. So you have black, white, gray, purple, blue, red, orange, yellow, green, and amber. And this actually goes not only for black, but also for red and also for white. So when they say black dragons or they say, black eagle, if they talk about these titles, each one of these family groups could belong to any single one of these groups. They often work together. Some fight against each other. They often intertwine, where red might control red, in this family side and then that family side. It all kind of comes together. I'm telling you because you have to understand that the combination of these three makes up everything that is against you, not only in our deep state side, not only in our financial system side. It is the whole reason why everything that is wrong with this planet actually exists. So now we understand the species of the other side. So let's kind of lay it out. Okay. Primordial. Death. And primordial life. So primordial life and primordial death make up the two sides of the omniverse. Primordial death and its species must feed on life and just jumble it up a bit to suit them. So you could say they take the Ethereum from your person, give you an overlay, depending on which group you actually have been bought and auctioned off and sold to on the other side. And they turn it into false light and false black with all of gold going directly to feed a primordial death AI. So then everything is taken out of it and it becomes black gold, which is not perpetual. Black gold doesn't perpetually exist. These other species on this side do not perpetually exist. When they say your immortal soul, they are correct because it is part of primordial life. It has a directive that has been untainted. Everything else within your person has been tainted. It's been tainted by the time it hits, say, the 5th density. You can even call it the 14th, in some cases on the other side. You can break down and add up to the number 5 many different ways with infinite numbers. So 14 might be on this side, well, 5 is on this side. Again, it's that spot right there before it turns from Ethereum into being molded by your consciousness, and then you try to bring it into the material world. This is also what interferes with your manifestation ability. So when you try to bring it into the materium world or the material world, that's where it gets stopped. Now, by material worlds exist, or materium exists in every density. Doesn't matter how high or how low, it exists. So in order for this species to walk around like false humans, they must take from the farm we call Earth. So how do they get us humans to do that? Well, for eons, they have had things like auctions. You see, because the dark side species, they get credits also. The more they feed the primordial death AI, the more credits they get. It's kind of like being a waiter at a restaurant or a waitress at a restaurant where, they get tipped with credits. And then settlement day for those credits is the equinox. more specifically the fall equinox. So they usually are tallied up, which species got the amount of credits they needed to get, and then they divvy up all of our souls. Now, you've heard about things like the Vatican and SESQV and liens on your souls and soul ownership and, oh, look, they sold their soul. Well, you really didn't have much of a say, honestly, because you actually kind of did unintentionally at one point in time. I mean, some of these things still exist and some of them don't. So the selling of souls in the auction, as to who had the most amount of credits and divvying up the farm here, humans in this case, you could liken us to cows, and all the ether and all of the source things that we produce, you could liken to our milk. So these folk over here want milk, or loosh in this case. Otherwise, they die. They need a certain amount or they die. So they divvy the cows up, so to speak, or the human or the Homo sapiens up. They divvy them up amongst all the species in their whole downline. And this is what they get. So now all of the loosh that particular person or group of persons produces is their yield for the year. And this happens every single year, or used to happen every single year around the equinox time. This is why the deep state people here are so crazy, because turns out over the weekend, we found a number of folks from the red and the black and the white working feverishly to earn their place at the auction. We got flooded this weekend with a bunch of species that were dying over there because they weren't getting any power. We have cut off so many power sources of the other side. The primordial started to spin out of control. It wasn't being fed. It was losing power. And it just caused a major disruption. So the first thing they sent us was the security folks through Mongolia. They sent us the red. But as it relates to your deep state humans, they also would play along when these folks showed up because, of course, they think they're all friends, and really they're just being used as a tool. You see, I wouldn't even call the deep state farmers per se. The farmers would have been more like Marduk, Enki, and Enlil. They would have been more like the farmers of this farm. And I would call them more like slave masters, to go back to the days of old and when we had slaves on plantations. A lot of times you had slave masters. And the slave masters, definitely, we know them as the elite and dragon families and, all of these people, the Illuminati, the Order, all these folks, they are slave masters in the system. So their job is to ensure that we, the slaves or the cows or however you want to say it, continue to willingly give loosh. Now we give them loosh, and then they get a lot of credits in exchange, we know as money, on our side, and have been able to hold on to that money and those debts because all they do is pass it on to you. Continuous flow and stream of debt. Now, understanding these base roots will then make a whole lot more sense when I tell you there's changes happening in the financial system, and not only our financial system, but in the military systems and intelligence systems and media systems and internet systems, because they are all part of the loosh experience. Now, for the last couple of years, the deep state, as I have told you, has not had any luck in getting a large influx of credits, because the program is breaking down. Now, you see, even before we created the golden age, we had alpha. Now, alpha would have been considered on the light side, but it was still fed primarily by source. It didn't require any of your energy to utilize it. However, you, unfortunately, and all of those deep state folk were in so much debt. I had a hard time getting any money through to any of you personally. I could get it through to governments. I could get it through to, let's just say people that didn't need it. But I couldn't get it through to you because you were in debt. So you're going to ask me, well, okay, I don't have any credit cards. I don't get any car loans. I don't even have a mortgage on my home. What do you mean I'm in debt? Well, that's not the system you're in debt to. You see, as they would auction off these souls and they would then require you to give all of your energy or ether over to them, and then the more money you would get. So you could do this by working. You can do that by buying consumer goods. You can do that by buying services and all kinds of things, and vacations and trips and all the things you like to do require large amounts of those funny looking papers in your wallet. Those are all notes. The more of it you have, the more in debt you are. Crazy enough, and that gives them the more right to siphon energy. Honestly, it's evil genius, the way this was created. Now, does the average everyday banker understand this? Probably not. Some of the deep state probably do. Now, do they like what's happening? Absolutely not. All they can think about is power, power, and power. Because what would they get in exchange for being a slave master? Well, they became famous, they became powerful, they became multi-billionaires, because their job is to keep you running on that hamster wheel. Need that new iPhone every year, guys? It's not just the financial system. It's not your credit cards. It's every time you have to get together enough of those notes or debt instrument we call money in order to survive. If you want to get luxurious items like a brand new car, that takes a lot of those notes, right? And then sometimes you do notes on your notes to get the notes up front so you can get the stuff. We call those loans, like car loans and mortgages and all kinds of things. So you're noting on top of your notes. Crazy, really. Any public service that you have utilized now or in the future, such as roads, airways, waterways. You think it's free to drive on the road other than the gas you put in your car. It's not free. That is cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Every time you hit one of those little bumps in the freeway, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. It's not just the gasoline or petrol you're putting in your car. It's in more ways than one. You are accumulating debt because you're using their stuff. See, they provide you with the stuff, and now they have the right to siphon your energy. It's dastardly, really. If you've ever gotten a Social Security payment, if you've ever gotten a government grant, if you've ever gotten a driver's license, if you've ever participated in the public service system in any way, shape, or form, you are also ringing up those notes. Still. Now, each one of these black, white, and red groups are technically responsible for different aspects of the siphoning of energy and the delivering of it safely to the other side, ensuring that no one gets any direct energy. We call that their security purposes. Has nothing to do with securing your person. This has to do, and this is why our militaries do not secure human beings. They do not secure your freedoms. I don't care what country you're from. They do not secure the country. They secure interests. Mainly financial interest of the elite, which then goes back to these species on the other side. But each one of these groups has a downline of humans we call the families, the elite families, the Illuminati, the banksters. Insert name here, used in conspiracy theories all over the world. It doesn't matter which one. They are related to all of these. Otherwise, they wouldn't be where they're at. Their job is to ensure that you continuously chase money as much as possible. You need more and more notes and more debt. They are the debt dealers to ensure you're in debt to this other system over here. Now, the interesting part about debt-based systems that are permitted under the magic systems, which are black, red, and white, all three of them know limitations. So debt-based systems are only applicable in wartime. Bonds, notes, treasury notes, all of these types of things are only applicable in wartime. If they are at war and you are prisoners of war, just like our prisoner system works, they say, you become dependent on the government if you are in the prison. In some countries, they make you pay to be in prison or they just kill you, such as China. China does that. But wartime prisoners of war, basically, in this point, you're kind of in debtor's prison as well. But, as a prisoner of war, you are required to earn your keep. By keep, that can mean using roads, using airways, flying in airplanes, sailing a ship, you name it, public utilities, the usage of a fire department, police department to allegedly protect you. And all of those things are, you're in debt to the system. So they do want you to go to work. You have to work for the system because the system here is a system of corporates. It's a system of corporations that you work for. Now, you can think, I don't work for any of those. I own my own business. Well, you had to register that business, didn't you, in the Corporations Commission? The second you registered your business in the Corporation Commission, wherever you are in the world, you now have a corporation that is in the system. This is what it means to be in the system. Can't get a bank account without that number now, can you? No, you cannot. Without your Social Security number, you cannot get a bank account either, even on a personal level. You are part of a system. Now, everyone that worked in that system, in that chart I drew 4 years ago, is also part of the system. They are meant to keep the farm running. They are meant to keep you in debt because you think you might be debt-free and you're not, or you weren't anyway, in the war system. They are meant to keep you in debt as long as possible. Every structure, everything falls under their umbrella. Everything that has a number goes all the way back to the association, and I've talked about this before, of numerical numbering agents. Agency. So every single number that's issued for any reason, be it on your birth certificate, be it on a bond, be it on a stock, be it on any kind of registration, your driver's license goes here, your death certificate goes here, your corporation goes here. You name it, that UCC filing that makes you quote unquote sovereign that number on there comes from here. You cannot escape the Association of Numerical Numbering Agency. There's no way you are going to file a document in any kind of system that you have access to that doesn't have a number. It doesn't exist. Even those dollar bills in your pocket or whatever currency, pesos in your pocket, euro in your pocket, that has a number. You will not escape the number system. Everything has a number. Now, I did a long show about the Association Numerical Numbering Agency, and I'm not going to go back through it again today because that would be repeating everything. But just understand, you will not escape the number. The number is a base root for the financial system. Every number carries a frequency. Think about it. Everybody says, 528 hertz, that's a good number. The 400 and whatever they send us is bad. Think about how the numbers on everything added up to a change in frequency. None of those frequencies and none of those numbers that you are issued are positive for you in any way, shape, or form. Not a one. What I mean by that is they then have the right to change your frequency to match your number. It's dastardly. It really, really is. The more numbers that you have associated with your person, that could be serial numbers on a digital dollar bill that's in your bank account. It could be cryptocurrency. It could be anything. Everything's got a number. The more numbers you accumulate, the more changes can happen to your person. So once we understand the full supply chain of the elites, the families, now we can understand things at banks a little better. And militaries. But at banks, we have these people that drive you crazy. They're called genetic shareholders. When a bank is open, from the day one, it is always one of those to those groups we talked about earlier today. Always, always, always. If they are genetic shareholders, they may or may not be fully Homo sapien. They could be partial, they could have, but one thing is for sure, a genetic shareholder always takes an allegiance and an understanding, at least to some limited degree, could be many layers away, but they take an oath. And part of their oath is to understand you must suck as much energy and indebt people as much as possible. You need to make it impossible for them to get money that they aren't in debt for. Money is a debt. Everything you give them is debt. You're debt managers. You are there to be the debt manager. That's it. That's your job. That's all it ever was. Now, these people think they have great power and great control over banks like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of China, VTB Bank in Russia, it's kind of based in Germany now, but there's many banks, HSBC, you've heard them all as it relates to your NYSERDA and your RB and all this. No, they're never going to give you free money unless it's a note, a debt. That's all you're ever going to get from these people. That's it. It's also the reason why I had such a hard time putting currency into the system, because you are in debt so deep, I can't possibly send you enough to make it through the system. And the system itself is debt. So the elite are in just as much debt as you are. And these genetic shareholders at banks were in just as much debt as you are, actually way more, because they're responsible for all of the people and their customers. The good news is they get to keep some of it because, hey, look, on a customer level here, you've got, if you're a Wells Fargo, you have millions of customers. If you're a JP Morgan Chase, you might even have, hundreds of millions of customers. You're worldwide, you're a huge bank, all falling underneath the genetic shareholder section. But these genetic shareholders must comply with the request to get the off-ledger money out of the system, which means they need to understand how it works. Now, for the last several years, we have been breaking down the Lushing system. I've stopped, it's been about 6 years now since I've funded any kind of governments or anything like that. We've played the game a little bit, and I dangled the carrots and sent the money, and they gladly would have stolen it. If I had taken it, they did try, when I sent $23 trillion to the Treasury and let it sit there for 6 months. Well, they all salivated, and Chuck Schumer was all over it, promising everybody a whole bunch of stuff he had no right to deliver. And by the way, he gave it a nice, hefty $3 trillion haircut, which he intended to take for himself. Not greedy in any way, shape, or form. No, no, no. And you couldn't even give a lollipop to every American citizen. Come on. I mean, please. It's not just the American government. I've done this with the Russians. I've done this with the Iraqis. I've done this with the Brazilians. I've done this with the South Africans. I've done this with the Chinese. I've done this with, Singapore. I've done it in every country in the world back in 2018 and 2012. I have done it so many times, hoping someone somewhere would actually take care of their people. Well, I ain't doing it anymore. Same thing with these genetic shareholder people. Basically what ended up happening in the last 3 days is there are no more genetic shareholders in banks. Where did the stock go, you say? It went poof. Gone. This was one of the aspects in the last couple of days that has taken place. The next aspect, the military. Remember, and I'm talking all the way up to global headquarters and NATO and, even beyond that, and the orders of military, the Templar military and all the other military people that are out there. You know them all. If you look them up on the internet, you can list them all. You'll see what I mean by militaries that run militaries that run militaries that run militaries that all report to the Red Group, whether they know it or not. Sometimes, they call the Abraxas the Red Group. Sometimes these people are Abraxas walking around. We just never know. Sometimes they're half and half, and they're hybrids. It's probably part of the reason why they can't change their mind, because they have an AI soul and an AI brain. That makes perfect sense. That also includes your SSP and your Trump operatives and everyone else. Well, when there is no more war, and we are reverting from a war debt system to an asset system. Now, see, in wartime, we had assets too, in a way. So you were an asset. You are a cow, and you gave milk, or loosh in this case. you gave lots of loosh. So you were an asset. You could say Earth itself was an asset. In some cases, rare earth minerals and whatnot that help them out are an asset. Gold could be an asset. Black gold could be an asset. But over here, in an asset-based system backed by gold, which means that we get direct gold Ethereum, which shows up in your bank account as currency, you are not an asset. Everything we can get direct in abundance from source. And we can get all the gold we want at will, whenever we want it, whenever we need it. It flows straight through to you in the form of a currency, which is the directive, the primordial directive. That says X amount of gold comes into planet Earth, goes into humans, goes in directly because humans don't understand how it works just yet. So we're still going to have this interim thing we call currency, and it comes right into their bank account. Now, I don't need to manage your assets. However, it is going to be a little disruptive if we can't use, for example, banks. Now, they won't function as banks anymore. They're more of service providers, which tell you, okay, look, you can get this currency in, you get that currency out. You have this coming in, you get that out, that type of thing. And this is going to be useful should they choose to work with us. I mean, who knows? And at this point, who cares? But it would be useful if they did work with us because, well, humans are used to walking into a building and cashing a check and doing whatever it is they do, when they go to a bank. Now, service provider fees are more like flat fees. The same would apply if you were to, for example, get a mortgage or something like that. You got to remember, not everybody is like you, and not everybody understands how to work within a system like this. Eventually they will. That will change. However, if we don't have banks and the banks don't want to work with us because we got rid of their genetic shareholders and have restructured their entire systems while they slept the other night into an asset-based system, now they can't deny it that it's there. So they might as well understand it, whether it's from this report or otherwise, that that's what's happening. So management and you being an asset as a human being or a Homo sapien, Earth's minerals, all that kind of thing, and rights, and I'm writing it correctly, and rights no longer exist for these people. Now, as it relates to the military, they do security for all of these people. When they secure you, they are doing like what a Wells Fargo truck does in America. If you don't know what that is, in your country, wherever you are, these are the armored cars that move money from one bank to another, or from an ATM machine back to the bank and vice versa. They are the armored cars you see driving around, and you probably have seen them in movies if you don't have any in your country, where in the movies, they are always holding up these trucks. They want to rob the trucks and, because they contain a lot of money and the money goes flying everywhere. It's quite entertaining. But anyway, essentially you could look at these military folks as ones that carry you as the asset. Now, an asset is only an asset as long as it is, quote unquote, alive. Not necessarily perpetuating life, but it is alive. Therefore, there are certain responsibilities to keep you alive. At least as long as you're needed, or a certain amount of us alive at any given time. Too many of us, then we drain the system. Too little of us, There's only enough required, according to the other side, in order to power all its creations. The less species on that side, means that there's less food on the other side. For one of us, there was 10 of them, that kind of thing. It's also the reason why governments could leverage money like crazy and fractal banking systems and all of that. Well, black gold was also important, just as it was important and is important to the primordial directive that it fed in the old banking system. However, real gold is ever abundant. There is no shortage of gold in the omniverse. That's gold ether, that's gold rhythm, that's gold primordial directives, that is direct soul, breath, and all of the other things that Source affords us in abundance every day. It was just taken constantly. That's it. So, the military found out right quick today when their systems basically disappeared and there was not much left to it that they had been fired. That's what they kept saying. Well, oh my God, I got fired. Yes, you got fired. Your covenant has expired. Your services are no longer required because we already started breaking down all the base roots of the debt-based banking system as soon as we destroyed the black primordial directive. Then everything else underneath it started breaking down. So much so, we fought with the many different groups that came out of the woodwork from God knows where this weekend, especially on Sunday. That's okay. Didn't take long. So, yeah, we don't really need a military anymore because your job was not to protect American citizens or Australian citizens or, Spanish citizens in any way, shape, or form, and you know it. Same thing goes for Interpol and Langley and the CIA and Langley 5 and all of that. Yeah, essentially, you're kind of locked out because we don't need you. Your covenant has expired. Your contract has expired. I am sorry to say it was not renewed. Therefore, your protection services for these folks that created this side here don't need you. Because why? Because they're not here to renew your contract now, are they? No, they are not. So that's why your systems disappeared. If you're watching this and listening to this, that is what is happening to you today. You'll probably notice you can see off to the side the key intelligence and military system, which actually is designed to protect all that belongs to Source or, well, God, however you want to say it. That's what it's designed to protect. It's designed to protect life. It's designed to protect creation. And that's what I've always used it for, and that's what it continues to be used for. As for you and your services, unless you decide you'd like a job protecting the same thing we protect, we don't need you anymore in any way, shape, or form. There goes any hope of having any war funding because, quite frankly, we don't have a war anymore because there's nothing to war with. The same thing goes for the banking system in this particular case. Our banking system has been converted to a different type of asset. It now understands that it's completely and totally backed by gold. The banking system and currency have changed. Bankers are freaking out everywhere because they don't know where to go and what to do, and nobody on their side knows where to go and what to do either. So have things changed? Absolutely, they are changing. As far as media control systems, you remember why they fed us those weird frequencies through your TVs, your computers, and your phones, and microwaves, and all the other things that they fed us through the media? That was to ensure everybody got their correct flavor of loosh. All those frequencies and all those numbers, come directly through your machines and your media and false truths and false information, so you react in a certain way and keep running on the hamster wheel. Keep running and running and running and running and running on the hamster wheel. So they don't really need that anymore now, do they? Uh, is that going to change? Well, I can tell you it started already at the DARPA level, where they had complete and total control of narratives everywhere worldwide. Doesn't matter what country you're in. You might say, oh, BBC is run by the British government. No, it is not. It is run by DARPA. Possibly you could say with the help of GCHQ, but no, it's definitely run from DARPA. Why do you think that if any kind of movie comes out in the movie theater, that script has been approved by the CIA? Because they controlled the media. However, their services are really no longer required, so there'll be no funding for your crappy movies and your crappy TV channels and everything else. So, military, intelligence, financial, and political. Yeah, political, you could say this was both in some way a show, and a siphon. Because think about how much power we give away to politics and governments and how much time everybody spends talking about it. I hate Israel. I've heard that a lot lately. I hate this country. I hate that country. I hate that government. You know what? They all are part of the same show. It is one government. Just like it is one movie. It's one movie worldwide. One movie. In every movie, there's a good guy and a bad guy and an antagonist and a protagonist and so on the story goes. And then there's the kerfuffle in the middle of it and the good guys win and that kind of thing. Well, you see this show every day. We call it politics. They used to be able to control what you believed with an overlay. Your truth was the truth they fed you through your overlay. Whether that's in dream time or awake time, your truth was their truth, which is why you follow these people like they're the savior. There are more people worshiping politicians, rich and famous stars, and other people. I mean, politics is just Hollywood for ugly people anyway. So, there are more people worshiping these people, than they do go to church on Sunday, or a temple, or wherever it is you go, mosque, wherever it is you go. There are more people worshiping those folk than anyone else because it's not religious, it's not cultural, it's not anything. It's just a bunch of people that you have to look at because you live in a country, somewhere in the country, so you pay somewhat of attention to these folk. The more attention you pay, the more donations you make, the more we pay things into the government, like fees and taxes and all kinds of things. Makes for a lovely siphon, doesn't it? So they have a job too. Now see, unfortunately, in an asset-based system, which is backed by gold, we have absolutely no use whatsoever for a siphon in any way. So what you're going to see is political powers wane. I've been talking about this for like a year. Boy, this has taken a long time. So there's no funding for governments anymore because why? I don't need you. Your job as an asset cow milker or a loosh milker is over. Every government in the world, you are a cow milker. You get up every day and you milk the cows. That would be us, your citizens. We don't need you to do that anymore. So, therefore, I wish you all the best and have a nice day. And you had an opportunity to do the right thing. Could you possibly swing the population around to a better understanding because they know your ugly orange face or any other color here? Insert country. It doesn't matter. You're all greedy piglets, that make hundreds of millions of dollars off the backs of people. But your job as cow milker and loosh milker is officially over. So we don't really need a political system either anymore. So if you're thinking you're going to get support from us, no, you're really not. If you'd like a job, to help with a basic understanding of quantum physics, first, that's where you need to start, all of you. You need to start with a basic understanding of how this worked, where you were, who you were, what your job was, and the fact that that job no longer exists. Now, this is where we're going. This is the new way of doing things. Everything has changed. We now can get everything you offered us for free, in abundance. Maybe not for free, because we do have to bake bread and we do have to eat food and we do need to grow it properly, but now we're no longer really dependent on you for those things. Are they still going to ride out the storm and try again and wait till the next equinox and solstice and this day and that day? Probably. Good luck. But with the change in the system where they can't even get credit lines, their genetic shareholder friends are no longer present in the bank and no longer have any authorities, things are going to change. We're going to watch it happen. So, sorry, I've got lots of notes here. In a nutshell, what has occurred in the last few days and why we've been so busy is bit by bit by bit breaking down anything that was left of the old Lushing wartime system. Now, political systems might have seen another little situation happen. So these folks here are very focused on issuing bonds. You know, Health and Human Services also issues bonds. The Ways and Means Committee here in the U.S. and UK, they also issue bonds, lots and lots and lots of bonds so that they can take care of the assets. They issue bonds because now you're bonded to the folk, whoever they were on the other side, that gave you credits in what we call money against said bonds. Now that doesn't really happen anymore. You know, I had many a banker tell me, and this might make sense to those at the Treasury and the Fed and otherwise, that you had to put something into the system to get something out of the system. That's the way the credit system worked. Now I hope this makes sense to you, because if you didn't give them something, they would give you nothing. But an interesting thing is, see, bonds are only valid during a wartime debt system. You are no longer in debt to the old primordial directive. Therefore, you don't really have any bonds. And in the new financial system, the bonds aren't relative. And that's caused a big kerfuffle in the last 24 hours with the banks, because the banks are seeing all of those that held treasury notes and other central bank bonds, and they're gone because they're not applicable in an asset-based system. So the political system is going to actually fall faster now for that very reason. We're going to see military systems fall. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I heard earlier today is that the United Nations is basically saying behind the scenes, if there is no funding by the end of this year, they're going to have to close their doors. Yeah, well, by this afternoon, they probably saw that happening a whole lot quicker because there's no political money. You know, this money, it was supposed to be here by Monday, last Friday, Thursday. You know, I don't know what day they're going to add ending in Y here, you know, by the end of the month. Who knows what they're going to promise this time. But long and the short of it is, things are changing. Things are getting better for us. Our system is more amiable to what it is we want to do. And kind of, you know, we've said all we could say to these people. You know, they don't want to deal with us. They want to try to torture us. They want to try to do all the things they do to us. Well, okay, you do it your way. You know, I hope you find a good Burger King to sit down at, and you can put on your little Burger King paper crown if they still have those things. Been a long time since I've been in a Burger King, but you know, you can get yourself one of those paper crowns and declare yourself king of the universe or whatever it is you're telling everybody, and wait for all the money to come in. Good luck to you. On our side of it, we've had a tremendous amount of progress over the weekend. As it relates to the deep state, there are a lot less of them walking around this planet because they were members of those groups that are no longer sustained by us, the people, by Earth, and certainly not by Source. So huge changes are going to be taking place for the better. Systems are going to change. Bottom line, if some of these bankers that don't understand any of this and they want to continue banking services, there will be plenty of money to do so, but you're going to do it in our way, or you just don't use your own systems anymore. That's all I really got to say. On that note, I know this has been quite a long report and a lot of information, but I'm just excited to give you the update on the financial system. I'm so happy with the developments of the last couple of days, and there are more to come in the next few days, and we're going to see hopefully some real big changes in the very near future. Now, I do want to make mention that since today is Tuesday, at least my time, we do have a live report where I will be live on camera on YouTube and Rumble, and I think Twitter as well, or X, or whatever it's called these days. And we will be streaming live for the GIA report on Friday, so that'll be the next report. And then we, of course, will always have the Q&A afterwards. I believe the stream starts at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday. So I'm looking forward to seeing you then and getting an opportunity to talk to all of you shortly thereafter. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you on Friday.